lot of what people use Google for now, and I think it's going to increasingly be the case, is just navigational or brand search. It's like, I know, Mike Blumenthal, dog trainer, is the one I want to work with. That's the one my vet recommended. So I'm going to look him up and see what his reviews are, or I'm just going to look his contact information up, right? I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to say Mike Blumenthal, dog trainer, Olean, New York. Is that the correct pronunciation, Mike?
You got it.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a greater and greater percentage that's navigational or branded. I've done my research, or I've heard about something from somewhere else, or I've read about something from somewhere else, and now I'm going to Google because that's the most efficient way for me to get to that website, right?
Correct. Yeah, you're absolutely on the money. If I were to summarize that, I would say we're moving from this attention economy to a trust economy. And so part of that new economy is that SEO is not the same quote unquote performance channel that it used to be, and maybe should have never been regarded as such, but it's much more of a branding channel. It's much more about influencing users along the way. As uncomfortable as it is, I mean, every human is resistant to change, right? And I like to have my playbook that I can repeat and I know it works. The reality is that a lot of ways of thinking need to change in this new economy. For example, what are the metrics that we're looking at? How do we gauge success? What even is success? And so I will not pretend that this playbook has already been written and it's kind of in a secret drawer that I have under my desk here, and I just, I pull it out only for my clients. That is not the case. But, what we can already see is that we need a better way to understand how much users trust us, the sentiment, a lot of the common practice that other teams have adopted, from UX research to product teams or brand teams, and merge qualitative and quantitative markers to understand if we're optimizing, quote unquote, in the right direction. And it also opens the doors for us to broaden our scope. I'm not just talking about ChatGPT here, right? We already mentioned Reddit and YouTube, etc. I think as an SEO, you're even more these days like a police person in a busy intersection directing traffic, which are, there's not actual web traffic, but which are different teams, and kind of bringing them in the same direction around certain guidelines, than this amazing technical genius who, changes a couple of, tags, and then all of a sudden traffic skyrockets. And I don't want to diminish technical SEO in any means. Like, it's actually very important for bots and everything else that we're seeing, right? Success is an even bigger part of many teams playing together very well. For SEO, more in 25 than ever before. So that is my kind of quick commentary and rant on kind of how the world is changing based on not just this study, but all the trends that we're seeing.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the discussion of tactical changes or attitudinal changes that SEOs need to have. You've talked about some of that stuff already. So let's talk about that a little bit. And then the second piece of it, which is something you just mentioned, is where does this take SEO in the organization? Where should SEO sit now in the larger digital marketing enterprise? So let's talk about the tactical stuff first. The big sort of tactical, practical takeaways from this study for you guys.
I'll jump in here and I'll keep it to maybe 3 and then pass the baton on. So the first super tactical takeaway to me is that we need to be present on all these other platforms in some way or shape, right? So it's actually interesting because a lot of my clients have proactively started that conversation. Okay, how should we start on Reddit? How should we start on YouTube? Or whatever local community is. It doesn't always have to be Reddit. So there needs to be somebody responsible in the company or on the team to engage and answer questions and ask questions on Reddit itself in a very passive way, not overselling. There needs to be somebody to think about like what topics are important for us when it comes to YouTube and how can we be present there? Should it be a full-on production? Should it be something very scrappy? Should it be a faceless video? There's all these different choices. And you can make these based on how Reddit and YouTube show up for your most important queries, right? You can still draw the line from the old world, but SEOs need to think about those platforms and how they're represented there, which often starts with listening and monitoring. And they're like very affordable tools these days to get that information. 2, I think there's a lot to be said about how to structure your content, not just to be visible in the AIO. Sure, of course, it must be a goal and you want to be as visible as high up as possible, but also to send the right trust signals and to make it easy for users to skim and find their answer. So one example that we saw to add some color to this is that users will go, I remember this specific example where one user is looking for the best month to buy a car. And the first organic result is US News. and the user, even though the answer is, I think in the AIO, if I remember correctly, they still go to US News because they want a bit of a more credible answer, and they skim through the article and they find this box that says key takeaways and the answers in there. They're like, okay, the answer is right here. So they don't even read the article, right? They just skim. They try to shorten their time to the answer or to value, and they find it in this highlighted element. And so we need to figure out how can we, or we need, I think it's already figured out, but we need to structure our content in very easy to navigate and skimmable ways, like key takeaways, FAQs, summaries, but then also trust signals like editors, reviewers, publish date, maybe disclosure about how you make money in certain cases, maybe editorial guidelines, anything that strengthens the user's confidence that the things you say actually have legs to stand on. And the third one, then real quick, is we need to do much, much deeper diligence of the people that we want to sell to. And so I think users are very well versed and trained in things like user intent, but they also need to add age and demographics to their arsenal, and also the stakes of a query. So if I'm thinking like in my spreadsheet, I would have a list of prompts or keywords that I'm going after, maybe topics, and I want to also assign, okay, what is the probable age searching for these topics? You can reverse engineer this with Google Analytics, for example, where you get demographical data. And you also want to figure out how high are the stakes of somebody performing this search, right? Somebody's searching for side effects of, some medication, probably pretty high stakes. Somebody searching for a coupon code, probably pretty low stakes. And that should define where and how much you invest in other platforms, but also how much you need to appeal to how you come to your answer in your content, how you come to the conclusion that you are giving people in your search results. So anyway, I'll cover those three, but I think we can probably draw a long list of practical takeaways for people to.
Again, you've got a bunch of those in your blog posts, and we'll link to that. Eric, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. You're good?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's tough with all these changes is that it's coming from Google. They're the ones that are the decision makers. We can't forget that, like, these small publishers and so many different things that used to appear in the search results are just gone. The algorithm just killed them. So it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the user decide that these small publishers are shitty and I don't want to read that? Which would make sense in our study because people are so much looking for what have they heard of before? Like, another way of saying brand is just like they want to hear something they heard before. Yeah, something, it could be just something small, but they want to know they recognize it. And then they're just not looking for, again, which came first, chicken or the egg, because Google just killed all these sites. But my thinking would be that for example, like review websites, if they haven't heard of it, I don't think they're going to click on it as likely. So it's Google has all the cards, right? So Kevin's got all these great ideas, and I totally agree with him. At the same time, it's like they're the ones that are making these decisions, and they're the ones that are scraping these websites and showing all this text. And we're trying to give actionable insights, but at the same time, it's like, wow, like websites have kind of gotten screwed.
Michael Blumenthal.
As Kevin was talking about Reddit, it is entirely possible, in my understanding of how Google behaves, that Reddit could suffer the same consequence as these 12 other sites that have recently been nuked at some point. That Google's long-term relationship with Reddit, to me, is suspect. And I think that investing too much in it, you have to understand that it's at risk like any other non-Google property is at risk.
Well, the entire, I've said this on a bunch of podcasts, but the thing that's so amazing to me is that Google's product strategy is being driven by competitors and by fear. Their movement into forums and first person content was a byproduct of their recognition that younger users in particular were defecting to TikTok and Instagram and places where they were getting that authentic content. And YouTube is a Google property, obviously. So Google started pumping all of that stuff into the SERP because they wanted to preempt the defections. And then when ChatGPT showed up, they went into this code red mode, and they have re-architected their whole product, which was probably moving to some degree in this direction, but not at the speed and not in the particular ways that it has. They are thinking about not the user experience, not what is the best for how to deliver the best information. They're thinking purely about how do we hold on to users and preempt them or block them from going elsewhere so that we can hang on to our ad clicks. And I find that to be, I think that the cynics of the world would say, "Oh, what's this? There's no surprise there." But it's remarkable to me that all these external factors are really driving the Google product. So
yeah, you're correct in that. Like, it's essentially Google reacting to trends, and it makes sense in a way, right? We had this whole story where users append the word Reddit to search results so that they get a Reddit answer and stuff. So I think there's some like strong signals also that the community gives. But sure, like Google would have never launched AI overviews if ChatGPT hadn't happened. They had the technology and everything they needed. They just never did.
The reason they were going to Reddit, the reason people were doing those operators with Reddit on them is because people were saying the results at Google were getting shitty. And so they were looking elsewhere. And that's a byproduct of the complacency of the monopolists. But that's a totally different conversation than we're having right now. So let's talk as a final matter. I mean, you feel free to add any more tactical advice, but let's talk as a final matter about how does what you learned from this study and what's happening in search change your sense of what the SEO role is? How should it operate vis-a-vis other groups within an organization and within digital marketing in particular? You use the traffic cop metaphor, but elaborate on that a little bit.
The number one challenge is going to be to get people excited about all the changes you're proposing, right? So I think this study does a good job in showing, hey, this is what's needed because users behave like this. Now, how do you sell that to get buy-in, right? For maybe more resources, maybe the person taking care of Reddit, maybe the person taking care of YouTube, maybe the extra content or the AI tools you need to now buy to create more content or different content.
But you're talking about a fundamental redefinition of what SEO is, I think, on some level.
Yes, a fundamental redefinition of what SEO is. I think last year, meaning 2024, was the peak traffic years. And now we're changing into like Kevin's predictions mode, that's kind of obviously based on the study, but that's not directly in the study. I think clicks are going to go, I think they're going to continue to drop. I think we're in a click recession and then we're going to enter a click stagflation, and I don't think they're coming back ever. Which again does not mean that people don't buy through Google anymore, right? I want to be very, very clear. We're changing metrics. We're not changing purchase behavior, or maybe a little purchase behavior, but we're not changing the fact that people still buy things. So we need to change the way that we score SEO, and in that change, tell an enticing story to leadership to fund that new model of how to go about SEO, right? Which as I mentioned before, right, a lot of like investment and trust in different platforms. So you need to be able to excite social teams, brand teams, advertising teams to invest kind of along the same path that the user behavior tracks. And maybe this should be a completely new team, right? Maybe there should be a growth team that puts all of these people in one bucket, because I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these, they're very similar or the same channel anyway, right? If you run ads on Google search and you invest in organic search, like that's the same channel. Maybe those people should be living side by side. So anyway, I don't want to make it too philosophical, but I think this is the time to redefine not just what the success model of SEO looks like, but also your investments. And the number one challenge for anybody in the SEO seat right now is going to tell that story to leadership and to pitch leadership to try these things. Because the reality is that because we're losing that middle measurement layer of clicks, that there's an even bigger lagging effect here of the results. So it might be that you invest in Reddit and YouTube and into new content and all these kind of things. You change your web design. It might take 6 months or maybe even longer for these things to take effect. And it might not be perfectly possible to isolate the impact of them. Now, I know that I've been in the management seat myself. I know incrementality is everything, right? What's the incremental value of doing anything, literally? And that's going to get so much harder to assess. And maybe it always was for SEO because people have these multiple touch points. So anyway, telling the story, pitching leadership to invest in this new playbook, that is going to be the most challenging part, because there is no company that has yet successfully done it, right? There is no HubSpot that has defined the inbound marketing playbook for companies, or maybe Amazon for shopping. That will still emerge. But now it's a time of taking big swings and kind of experimenting, and that's going to be challenging to sell.
There's often a distinction between surveys, what people tell a survey, and what they do in real life, right? IRL. So some people will answer surveys in an aspirational way or with a fuzzy memory or whatever, but there is a gap. Surveys are useful and directional and give us insight into sentiment and attitudes. But an example of this is when market bucket they fall into are asked, and C-suite executives, where should you deploy your marketing budget? They'll always say, oh, brand and of course performance, right? There's a sort of a mix of things. And then when it comes to what they actually do, they abandon brand spending and go to performance when there's pressure, when the next quarter's numbers have to be met, when there's a recession. The brand is always sacrificed, or the spending on brand is sacrificed. But what we know again and again, including from your study, is that it's very important for long-term success to build trusted brand, to build brand authority, and that supports everything else. But it is not supported by what we see marketers actually do in their kind of quarterly cyclical behavior, especially public companies.
Yeah,
Yep, absolutely.
By the way, I would also just say, like, what happened to focus groups? But focus groups, like, as it pertains to digital and like the way people click in different results, whether it's social media site or Google. I don't really know how much that's happening right now. Surveys, yeah, I do think there should be a lot of that. But I also know that, like, what we did here, these surveys are a lot more relevant. And I know you guys said you did some behavioral studies on maps, because the reason they're more relevant is that people have completed the behavioral task and then they're asked, boom, like, what did you think, blah, blah, blah. Or, we're using a speak out loud protocol, which, okay, that's in some ways a little bit of a negative, because you could say, like, if people are having to express their behaviors verbally, they might change how they behave a little bit. But the beautiful side of that is that they actually tell you what they're doing, right? So these kinds of studies that we typically think of as like branding studies or whatever, like, they're very useful for digital and searching in Google, but also perhaps like engagement in other like social media channels and things like that.
The goal is to understand the customer, right? To understand how the customer thinks, what the customer needs, and to better align your activities with that. I'll give you one quick example. I don't remember if this was before we started recording or this is part of the recording. Mike mentioned this. In one of our studies in legal, we saw an enormous response to local services ads. When they showed up, people really responded to those, and they got as many as 30% or a third of the clicks. And what we learned from doing similar behavioral research is we learned that people often don't understand that those are ads. They see the images, they see the stars, they see these trust badges, and they think, oh, this is a good provider. This is a lawyer that I can trust, has a lot of good reviews. But they don't recognize that it's an ad. Now, if they were totally clear on that, it still might attract their attention. But this is one of the factors behind the success of local services ads that you learn from listening to people. And they will tell you what is important to them, and it's really fascinating. I totally agree. Mike, you wanted to add something? No. Oh, all right. Okay. All right. Well, let's sort of wind down. I mean, this has been a fascinating discussion. We could certainly go on for a long time. But what are sort of some final thoughts that you would add about the study itself and your what you've learned from it, or just the kind of future of the space, the SEO world, digital marketing in general? A couple of quick thoughts from you guys.
Quickly, for me, I would say, I named my
Eric.
company after the word clickstream. And that was a long time ago, because to be honest, like, I had a company back in 2005, 20 years ago, primarily doing web dev and design. There was clickstream marketing. And then after I worked at SEO and Rush, I morphed it into like, SEO type stuff. But I just think that it served us really well, and it still will. But gosh, I feel like a sucker that I've followed too much of the clickstream data in trying to understand what's going on here. And even things like, like the citations that people are actually reading quite carefully to confirm what they want to click on, confirm what they want to do, are really important. We don't, SEOs, it's always considered like, oh, who cares about these citation descriptions and your rank number 4 or 5, blah, blah, blah. Of course, like, you may not get the click, but this is the kind of thing that's going to build your reputation. So people really look at these things, and we can't just look at these clickstream data things, especially now with maps or shopping or AIO, where they don't really, I don't think we capture this from the click data.
Yeah, I'll sign that, and I'll add that, critical to understand point that we've highlighted a lot of times now is demographics. And I often think back about that. I think it was last year when a Google executive mentioned that, high number of Gen Z people go to TikTok for search, right? And it made these huge headwaves.
That was Prabhakar Raghavan, who is no longer the head of search at Google.
Yes, exactly. I don't know what that says, about the fact. But what is true is that shift is generational. Age matters greatly when it comes to the adoption of any new technology, which often looks like play at first, but then turns out to be actually something more serious. And so, I think the biggest risk of Google being disrupted by AI and new technology is simply that young people, as good as Google is, might just not use it, right? And they might go to ChatGPT instead. And so I think that a lot of the findings today are actually very transferable to ChatGPT and co. It's still a sort of search engine cyborg. People do search, people vet results there as well, and they might not have to scroll as much, right? But they bring that same sort of skepticism to high stake prompts. They might still vet citations, etc. And so I don't want to say that this study defines the playbook for AI chatbots, but I hope that anybody reading this or listening to this understands that this is not just confined to Google search, but that some of these behaviors are very universal.
Yeah, I think they're transferable. They're psychological as much as anything else. Mike, do you want to add anything?
No, I'm good.
So one final comment that I want to make that we didn't get a chance. It was a question I wanted to ask you guys that we didn't get a chance to get into, but I think we're kind of out of time now. Is what is the role of AI now in digital marketing and content creation? Given that what you have collectively described implies a lot of human, authoritative, authentic content and not generic machine content. I mean, certainly AI and human editorial interaction is a way to maybe address that. But I think there's another conversation to be had about where does AI now fit in this world that you're describing of brand authority and credibility and authenticity.
Yeah, I would say that AI is essentially the train that brings you the goods the fastest, but it doesn't make the choice for you. So what I mean is getting an answer to problems, maybe problems you would have never searched on Google before, is now easier and more effective than ever. But with that efficiency comes a higher skepticism. And it's, people should be skeptic, right? LMs can hallucinate and they can make things up and they will be sycophants. Sure, I think it's actually warranted. I wouldn't outright reject anything from AI. I think there's a tremendous value in their answers. But the reality is that we're moving away from this kind of middle ground between answer efficiency and trust to the extremes. And so the extremes are, I get incredibly great answers and I'm incredibly skeptical if they're right. And the chance for companies is to inject themselves not in that answer thing. Sure, you want to be part of the answer or citation, absolutely, right? Don't think you can give a better answer than ChatGPT. Instead, you want to be the place where people come to validate and fact check and see if the AI answer is correct.
Okay, all right, Eric. Thank you very much, Kevin Indig. Thank you, and Mike, as always. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Gather Up for sponsoring this podcast. We will be back next week with episode 200, fill in the blank, probably 08, but it could be an encore episode depending on our mood. Thanks you guys for your generosity with your time and providing all this information. I know it was valuable for people, and we will see you next time.